Thank you. This morning, we're going to concentrate on just 5 poems and leave some time for discussion of the whole conclusions that we're making from our study. And so you each have your copies of sonnets, but we're also circulating copies of the 5 sonnets. And Kathleen, I think you can follow along from there. And if you need, Kim can email you the 5 copies we're looking at. Are you comfortable? Do you have your own copies in front of you of the sonnets?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so just raise your hand or wave and we'll take care of you if you need anything with having the sonnets up in front of you. Because I did not prepare a PowerPoint this morning because it really wasn't necessary. We're just going to be looking at these sonnets up close and in detail. And I am starting with a picture from the New York Times this morning that it reminds me of the mood of some of these sonnets. And I'll pass this around. I hope, no, you can't see it very well. We'll bring it up close to the screen in a little bit after I show it to these people. In the middle of the picture is a statue of Princess Olga, a very revered figure from the past of Ukraine, standing in a Ukrainian city. And completely around her, almost swallowing the statue, are just hundreds and hundreds of sandbags that the Ukrainians have put up to try desperately to protect the statue that's so dear to them of their past and one of their monuments that's very likely to be destroyed in the shelling that's taking place. So the picture has such a powerful reminder of how fragile yet how important the monuments of the past are and how easily they're how isn't your impression of the picture? This is hopeless. I don't care how many sandbags you put about that statue, it can be destroyed by a Russian missile like that because it's bombing whole buildings, shearing off the side. And just that's what's happening over there. I think we have a response in America that's different from some of the other invasions of third countries that have just plowed into a country and destroyed everything. And the world has not watched it like they're watching now. There's much more watching what's going on in Ukraine, I think, than there has been in some of the other invasions, even of Chechnya and so forth. Oh, Amy is here. Now let's see, I'm going to turn off a little bit of the light here. Hi. Maybe you know how these lights work. If you could turn the lights down just a little bit. All right, see if you can get the lights down just a little bit. All right. Let's also, for Kathleen's sake, go around and each give your name and just a little bit, just a sentence about yourself while Amy's getting the lights down. So Suzanne Harrington. Suzanne Harrington. Oh, pass that. Yeah, pass the picture around.
No, the link.
Oh, the link, yes.
Oh, can you start there?
Hi, I'm Suzanne Harrington. Tina Pollock, been in Holland about 35 years.
Oh, yeah. That's right, that's right.
Mimi Keller. Barbara Kidd.
And Amy Henriksen is coming up in just a moment. So Kathleen left us for a second. Okay. So mainly the front lights that are over the screen, I think, would bring the screen up a little bit more and give us a little bit more.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I think that's better, don't you? Okay, good. All right, so the sonnets that we're going over this morning will be in our hands in just a moment. Some extra copies are being made, and I don't have the numbers them right in front of me now because I gave that away to make copies. But the sonnets we're reading all have something to do with the passage of time. I think I mentioned that someone has said that English poetry has only one theme, and that is transience, the transitory nature of life. Everything changes, everything passes, and that creates both the realization of its meaning and the mourning of the things that are past. And so each one of these sonnets is not really only a love sonnet to someone, but a sonnet about love and time, love and change, and the world as a place of change and looking for the constancy or the what endures behind what is passing. So I don't have to hold this. That's right. All right. So which one would you like to take first of the 5 that we're talking about today? All right, good. Thank you. All right, you want to start with number 3, the time of year thou mayst in me behold? Isn't that the first one in the series? All right. I've made sure to put this one in because it happens to be Judy Parr's favorite Shakespeare sonnet, and she's done a lot with Shakespeare in her study. So let's read this one through. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. So we've talked about the iambic pentameter, but I think taking it as a whole, I'm going to read it again and think of 1 or 2 words that you would apply to this, to the way this sonnet, what kind of pleasure does it bring? That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed by that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. 1 or 2 words that of the, what kind of pleasure does this poem create in your mind, or what is it? What feeling does it give you?
Kind of a bittersweet.
Bittersweet, melancholy.
You're kind of echoing to me, is that?
Okay, is that, oh, because the other mic is on. Okay, so when that's not in use, we should have that off. Okay, is that good? Okay. Kathleen, are you hearing well? Can you hear?
Yes, yes, I hear very well. Thank you.
All right, good. Bittersweet. What about the sounds? If we go through and think about the sounds, one thing I noticed was how many sounds of W and Y we have in this poem. When, few, yellow, bare ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night, those bees, which by and by black night doth take away. Death, second self, the F's and the THs are that breathy sound that really carries through, of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as on the deathbed whereon it must expire, as the deathbed, consumed with that which it was nourished by. So until we get to the couplet, we did have 3 quatrains that developed images, each one developing kind of its own set of images that work, that have these sounds intertwined, that have the rhyme scheme that we've come to recognize as a Shakespearean rhyme scheme in quatrains rhymed A, B, behold, hang, cold, sang, and then day, west, away, rest, fire, lie, expire, by, strong and long. These rhymes are much more regular than in some of the sonnets. None of these are really off rhymes or partial rhymes. They're really true rhymes all the way through on usually 1-syllable words, and with rhymes that are what I would call common rhymes. Like behold, there are a lot of words that rhyme with these particular rhymes. Now let me back off and think about what we introduced as being the speaker and the person spoken to. There is a my or I, there is a me or I in the poem. So the speaker from line 1 is indicating age, that time of year thou mayst in me behold when yellow leaves, that's autumn, or none, moving toward winter, or few old leaves hang on the trees in winter, do hang upon those boughs. And then when the boughs shake against the cold, we almost see these older bare arms shaking against the cold, and now it seems like winter. And then we shift to another amazing image here, bare, ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. Now the boughs on the tree are being called choirs. What is a choir in church architecture? It's like those pews in the front where the choir would sit. You've seen that chancel arrangement where you have this like a chancel, but almost a ruined church that's bare, that's aged, that's a relic of things past. Then it's going to go back to a new image of me. In me, thou seest the twilight of such day. So now the first 4 lines were about the ending of a year. The second 4 about the twilight of such day. Now, in looking at these poems, whenever they're puzzling, I think it's important to take each pronoun and see if we understand what it does actually refer to. Those boughs seem like a tree, but they also seem like arms. And the ruined choirs then have changed the image where a choir sang. Now we have twilight as, what is it that fadeth? In line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In line 6, what is it that fadeth? Is it day or sunset? And I think it's day. Of such day as after sunset fadeth. It's day that's fading. You don't really say the sunset is fading. The sunset isn't technically fading. The day is fading. Which, when it fades, by and by, black night doth take away, takes away the twilight. Death's second self. So now night is, of course, being compared to death, a very standard, metaphor that seals up all in rest. Now another image is presented in the third line of a fire that is dying out. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie. What happens to a fire in the evening when people sort of bank the fire for the nighttime? They want some kind of coals to last through the night, so they sort of cover the fire and partly in the ashes so that it'll slow down and keep feeding on its fuel while it stays alive, prolongs the time that there's still some warmth there. So when they get up in the morning, it's not completely out. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that is on the ashes, so that what it burned up before is lying there now as ash. And that ash is what eventually could extinguish the fire. Technically, the buildup of ash and the lack of new fuel is going to suffocate the fire, consumed with the ash, which is the remnant of what it was nourished by, the fuel, the logs before. So it really is a continuation of that fire metaphor, with the ashes themselves now consuming the fire. But if they're banked correctly, then they prolong the fire. It's a very clever image in a way. It has a lot to it. But he went through a series of images, year, day, and then fire, which is in a way the most transitory of all three of these. The fire is consumed with that which it was nourished by. Then the couplet is going to step back and make a restatement of what the whole thing is doing. This fading of everything, the trees, the sunset, and then the fire. Thou perceivest. Now, the way the couplet turns, he's turning to what the addressee in the poem perceives. It's the lover that he's speaking to that's perceiving in the last two lines. It's the fact that both the speaker and the addressee understand that time is passing and the love that exists is dying or fading. The person is fading, but now the turn is this which makes thy love more strong to love that well. Now that's a 1600s use of strong. How many of you remember in the Navy hymn, Almighty Father, strong to save, meaning able to save, powerful enough to save. Almighty Father, strong to save is that older meaning where it just almost doesn't need the comma, strong to love, vigorous enough to love that well, which thou must leave ere long. Well, which thou must leave or which I must leave? No, which the lover who's being addressed here is the one who will have a loss when the beloved one, when the speaker passes on. Now let's step outside the poem and go back to the question that's often been raised with many of these sonnets about, are the sonnets all little biographical essays of something that Shakespeare happened to him or is part of his love life or one of his loves or one of his actual condition in life? Well, we said on day one that Shakespeare was born in 1562. It's actually his baptized in 1664. So that's, I guess, technically Shakespeare's birthday is considered to be 1664. So he's 36 in the year 1600. And these sonnets were published in 1609. So he's 36 plus 9. So he's 45 years old. Now, to us, that's not old. That's not old age. And you don't come back and say, oh, well, everybody was older in those days. Everybody looked older at a younger age and everybody life expectancy was shorter. So maybe we don't consider 45 years old, but maybe in Shakespeare's time, 45 years old was 1 foot in the grave. How many of you don't accept that? As an individual life, that's really not. The life expectancy could be down because so many things killed people, including children. That makes average life expectancy goes down. But that doesn't mean that there were not many healthy people who would not consider 45 old age. I mean, Hey, the Bible says the days of our years are 70, or by reason of strength, 80. So what is that? What is 70? 70. Or by reason of strength, 80. Hey, that's not that different from the statistics we have today. I think in America, I believe that the man's life expectancy is something like in the early 80s, in the late 70s, and women are a few years more, like 6 or 7 years more. And it's not that different from that Old Testament image of the years of our days of our years. So therefore, I'm suggesting that Shakespeare is not old enough to be really writing this poem as if he is an aged man. Now, nevertheless, if the thou is a very young man, like there's a 20-year age gap or something, then that might be somewhat different. Now, as a question of human nature and human development, as people think about their lives, do you think that people under the age of 25, definitely young as we see it, still do think about the passing of time and the fact of death? And they're just they are poetically impressed with the significance of death in human life, that everybody's going to age and everybody's never going to be the same in 10 or 20 years. Or do you think young people don't have a sense of the passage of time?
That's what has happened to them. Like if they've had somebody that they've been close to in family that passes away, then it might strike them.
Good point. Good point.
Their experience.
Yes. And we just said that the death of children was much more common then than it is now. So there was hardly a family where women would typically have 5 or 6 children. There was a good chance that quite a number of women had lost a child, and not just a miscarriage. I mean, they had lost a child who was born. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, at that age, though, I mean, at that time in history, it's almost impossible for a child to have grown up without seeing death right around them, including especially a sibling, maybe a mother plus a sibling.
Yes.
And stepmothers.
Yes, that's right.
In childbirth.
That's right. Right. It's been shown as just as likely that a child will have a stepmother long ago than today, even though divorce itself was much less common, but death was much more common. So then widowers were creating step parents.
Right.
And
Shakespeare lost his son too.
yes, that's right. That's right. Shakespeare lost a child himself. So,
But this doesn't deal with the death of children or a young mother.
no, that's right.
We're really talking about something else. And I suspect that this is because. of a
Oh, here,
relationship.
use their microphone. So Kathleen, yeah, so Kathleen Kathleen is not there.
It seems to me that this is much more perhaps an observation of parents or uncle or someone who was close, that the young person was observing a long, happy, well, not necessarily happy, but a very long relationship that was ending probably through disease or perhaps just old age.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Anybody else had a comment there? So you're taking this outside the framework of a love poem of one specific lover. It has a wider range of that, but it's not, as you said, as Barbara said, it's not just referring to children. How many of you remember the first time when you really realized that your own parent was becoming aged? It was just like you would see them frequently, but now all of a sudden, maybe you haven't seen them for 6 months and they did change in a short period of time. And all of a sudden, boom, they look old to you for the first time. Do you remember that impression? I'm saying that because I do very much. When I was in college, my father went away on a church mission trip to Africa for something like a month or 6 weeks. And while he was there, he foolishly tried to jump over a stream, fell, and broke his ankle. So now he also has a cast on his ankle. And he looks kind of drawn and weary after this experience. So I'm up in the gallery watching him come into the international airport and go through customs. And for the first time, because of that limp, and that time has gone by, I see him as old. And it just gives me this tear, moment of tears to realize your own parents' mortality is upon you. And it isn't really, you can get over that, but it is that striking moment. This thou perceivest, so you do perceive the passing of time, which makes thy love more strong to love that well which thou must leave ere long. So he's making this point that our knowledge of the passing of time makes us more ready to carpe diem, seize the day. Today is the day that you have to enjoy this. It's passing away, so you do fully engage in the day. Don't let it pass you by with nothing to show for it. So that beautiful intensifying and condensing that the couplet does. And it doesn't do it till the very end. Now, if you remember, we read one in the beginning, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone be, weep my outcast state, and troubled deaf heaven with my bootless cries. That goes on for 8 lines of when I'm bemoaning my life. Yet at this time, I think about you is line 9. And so when I'm down in the dumps, I think about you, and then that turns everything around. That starts in line 9 in that sonnet. So it's a very long answer to the question. But here we have 3 full quatrains of developing that image of the passing and the ashes, consumed by that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong to love that well which thou must leave ere long. So their love is reinforced by the fact that it is fragile and passing.
Might be my own life experience, but to me, it sounds like love between 2 people who have found each other in an older age.
I can speak for myself on that as well. Some of you know that my second husband was someone that I dated for 2 years in my 20s. We drifted apart. 35 years went by. My marriage failed. His marriage failed. And then we renewed the spark when we were 63 and 61. So then we had 11 wonderful years together before he passed away. And certainly we had that feeling, not only of that we had missed the boat the first time, we had kind of fallen apart over misunderstandings and being too young. And then when we rediscovered that this was really the thing after all, it was this feeling that you mentioned. So people who get back together after a long period of time. Did you do that too?
No, but I just got married in June.
All right.
It wasn't somebody I knew before.
All right. All right. Well, and then when we got married, my husband ad-libbed in the wedding vows. He ad-libbed in the wedding vows something like, who knows where we'll be buried? I mean, we were getting married in Holland, and he said something about we'll love each other for, and who knows where we'll be buried. He just stuck that in there, and you could hear the whole audience go, oh. But the presence of that thought of the passage of time and how old, that you are starting your journey when you're over a certain age.
It feels a little more precious.
It feels a little more precious. Yes. Okay. Let's go on to the next one, which I think is, what was the second one I had in this sequence? Was it? Okay. Would someone else like to read this one? So we hear it. Okay, good. And by the way, in line 2, scholars have added what they think was in there, and that is thrall to these rebel powers that the array. Poor
Okay.
soul, the center. So try it that way.
Okay. Poor soul, the center of my sinful earth, thrall to these rebel powers that thee array. Why dost thou pine within and suffer dearth? Painting thy outward walls so costly gay, why so large cost, having so short a least? Dost thou upon thy fading mansion spend? Shall worms, inheritors of this excess, eat up thy charge? Is this thy body's end? Then, soul, live thou upon thy servant's loss, and let that pine to aggravate thy store. By terms divine in selling hours of dross, within be fed, without be rich no more. So shalt thou feed on death that feeds on men. And death once dead, there's no more dying then.
Beautifully read. So this is not a lover speaking to a beloved unless you think of yourself as your own oneself speaking to your own soul, who you do love, but you're also, sort of a meditative poem of internal reflection of the person speaking to his own soul. The center of my sinful earth. Thrall to these rebel powers that thee array. Why dost thou pine within and suffer dearth, painting thy outward walls so costly gay? What is the imagery there that really gets us going?
Dead on the inside and fancy on the outside.
Fancy on the outside, dead on the inside. Mhm. How many ghoulish figures from lore, folklore, and lore are all dressed up and just completely rotten to the core, like evil duchesses and wicked witches and so forth. They're all, and then painting thy outward walls so costly gay. I think we know from theater and history of fashion and so forth that excessive rouge and eyelashes that look like drapery fringe and being overly made up is not a new thing. They knew how to do that in Egyptian times and Roman times and Shakespeare's times, that women or foolish people could get completely gussied up to the level of a theatrical laughingstock or, that kind of thing. Painting thy outward walls so costly gay. And people could buy mansions, and the greatest mansions were very grand indeed in the 1600s. The palaces of kings and everything were, well, by the 1800s we had Downton Abbey, but Downton Abbey was nothing new. Downton Abbey was an abbey long before. And so the first 4 lines introduce even some medieval kinds of images and powers. A thrall is like a peon. It's an image of servitude. It's like a peasant or what do you call the lowest level in the medieval thing? Like a peon or a serf. Yeah, like a serf. Why dost thou pine within and suffer dearth? Because in the first line, the soul is called the center, the heart of it, the core, the center of everything. Why are you pining away? Why so large cost, having so short a lease? So life is just a lease. It's just, you're a tenant in your life. You're just a temporary occupant of your place on earth. You'll be replaced. You'll be passing on. The lease is going to expire. And dost thou upon thy fading mansion spend? Now the body that can be all decked out and decorated and costumed is compared to a mansion that is fading. And then poets love worm images. In Shakespeare, in John Donne, you're going to find worms, and not to be ghoulish, but bodies were buried without coffins very often. They were directly laid into the ground. And so it was literally true that worms would have their role in the decomposition of the body and what was going to happen. And if people were disinterred or a grave was dug up, people would see that partially decomposed bodies. John Donne has a poem that refers to worms. The first lines of the poem are, "When my grave is dug up again, some second guest to entertain." Graves were opened in order to put new bodies in. It was all part of the plan. Churches did it this way. They were layered kind of. And so he's going to be Donne is going to be even more ghoulish than this about the worms. Shall worms, inheritors of this excess, eat up thy charge? Is this thy body's end? So both charge and end have a lot of power in those simple words. If you have a child, that child is your charge. They are in your charge. You are the steward and caretaker of that child. And so that's the meaning of charge here, I think. Eat up the body that the soul was given. The soul is supposed to be the captain of the ship of the body. Is this thy body's end? And end can mean both goal or purpose. What is your, or of course, your final state. So both of those are plays, enrichments of very simple words that point in have more than one meaning in that day and this. Now we have the last 6 lines, and I think the turn in this sonnet occurs here after line 8, as it did in some of the other ones. Then, soul, live upon thy servant's loss, and let that, in other words, the body, pine to aggravate or to grow thy store. But aggravate also means gravitas. Grow in gravitas, grow in richness and meaning. Let the body be decommissioned. Let the body be not so important in order to make more weighty and grow the store that belongs to the soul. By terms divine, in selling hours of dross. So each of these are the same kind of inversion that we just, in the previous psalm, we had consumed by that which it was nourished by. The ashes are both consumed and they were the fuel. As deathbed whereon it must expire. And the fire is glowing on the ashes of youth. So by terms defined in selling hours of dross. Within be fed, without be rich no more. So each one of those lines is building upon the previous 3 as the speaker in the poem is now telling the soul what to do. Live upon thy servant's loss. So shalt thou feed on death that feeds on men, and death once dead, there's no more dying then. It's an argument for what? For what sort of idea or religious idea or idea of happiness?
Eternal life, or once you're dead, then your
Yeah.
soul lives
Mhm.
forward.
Yeah. And then just the urging of where your energy belongs. It's like, lay up not for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust doth corrupt, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. That's the same image as he's using here, the same kind of rhetoric of turning in the Bible. Don't be gathering stuff that's just going to pass away. Put your energy and your money and your courage into something that will last.
I was thinking about the parable about building the barns bigger and bigger. Fool,
Exactly.
today your soul will be
Will be
required
of you.
Mhm.
That's right. And think of, like, the book of Job is full of this.
Mhm.
And the whole Bible is filled with not just stories, but poetry and powerful parables that bring this to life. So I think in our age, not every undergraduate reader of these has the knowledge of what's in the Bible that we may have in this room here today, because we were educated in an earlier time of college studies, and probably we've heard this in church. Now, Shakespeare had heard things in church. He was baptized. His family were part of the Church of England. And so we do assume that he's aware of what the preachers of his time are saying. And so this is not some original insight of Shakespeare's. He's pulling on a very classic theme here of the relationship of the body and the soul. It's been said that until the Enlightenment, there was a feeling of shame about the body, and only the soul is valuable. However, is that in this poem? Well, only in a way. It's just emphasizing how short the lease of this, how little time it's going to last. Like your car is only a new car on the first day you own it. It's a used car the day you drive it off the lot. And 1 week later, you can't sell it for what you paid for it anymore. I mean, you've already lost the shine of the new car. And so every parent and every wise person is telling the younger people, don't be so stuck on the next trend or fashion or waste your money on these things. But this is taking it to another level that is more pleading and more rich in the way it's said, I think.
I think we've all heard too, and I know I've experienced this, you spend the first half of your life accumulating stuff, and then the second half of your life trying to get rid of it. We don't pay attention to the wisdom of the ages that we should.
Until we're 40 or 50, we're really concentrating on aggravating our story. You know, we're in the acquisitive path of life, of taking care of our kids and buying all the equipment you need to raise kids and all the things that people want to have a bigger house and everything. And then after that, oh my gosh, I mean, I don't know anybody who isn't in a phase right now of having to sort things out. And let me tell you, when you marry somebody and somebody else at an age over 50, and you both have a big household,
Yeah.
you're going to have to find out a way to sell all your husband's things, huh?
We don't need those tools.
Big donations this year. Oh, honey, I gave that away. So it is natural to life to have a season of building things up, and then a season of narrowing things down.
Children won't take any of the
I know. All right, and death once dead, there's no more dying then. So is this a terribly sad, bad, ugly poem? No, not really. It is just looking at an ideal of how to get body and soul so that they're both on toward the same idea of ultimate fulfillment. Let's go to, I think Sonnet 30 is the next one. Okay. Okay, who wants to read this one?
I didn't hear what when she said.
Oh, number 30.
I'll read it.
All right, good.
When to the sessions of sweet silent thought. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past. I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes, new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye, unused to flow, for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since canceled woe. and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore bemoaned moan, which I knew pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end.
Okay, beautiful. Beautiful. So again, 3 quatrains, and then the only the couplet, only the couplet comes around to, then I think about you and everything turns. All 12 lines leading up to that couplet are expanding the idea about bemoaning again a fore bemoaned moan. The first line is interesting because the phrase sweet, silent thought introduces kind of the world of the poem. If this is going back over old woes, then how is that sweet? And of course, it's not silent because the whole poem is bemoaning things, but the sessions of sweet, silent thought. Now, between sessions and summon, it sounds like a courtroom metaphor. There's going to be a debate or kind of a weighing of something, a judgment made, and I summon up remembrance of things past. How many of you know a French phrase that means remembrance of things past? La recherche du temps perdu. It almost sounds more romantic in French. Le recherche, seeking again, du temps, times, perdu, lost. The remembrance of times that are lost. So it's already a poetic genre almost, or a type of poem that's going to go back over the remembrance of things, times that were lost. But this is things past. Now, if you ever took Creative Writing 101, your teacher told you not to use the word things. You're supposed to make it specific. You don't just say things, you say something. Well, he broke that rule right here. But we don't need to have a rule like that. The remembrance of things past just tells us what the sonnet is going to be engaging in and elaborating on what it is. Now, recently, last week, I read in the New York Times that the Dictionary of Mental Disorders, the DSM manual that psychologists use to diagnose different problems, has now added the prolonged grief as a new category of something that requires mental therapy. And it's meeting great resistance in some quarters to say, why are you making pathology out of, let's say, a widow's prolonged grief for her lost husband, or a parent's prolonged grief for their lost child, or any other grief that is just lifelong? But the psychologists are defending this, and they're using a rule of thumb that if profound grief that's disabling, like can't get out of bed, can't go back to normal activities, can't resume friendships, lasts for a widow or the person with the loss for more than 1 year, then it's time for therapy to step in and help them go, let's say, back to normal, even though psychologists don't like to use the word normal. They like to use other ideas. But is this poem placing a value on remembering again and again and again and again that tremendous loss that you have? Because even though time passes, you still do remember a tremendous loss. It will be with you for the rest of your life. If it was the death of a parent, or if it was just the loss of something that isn't important to someone else, but it was a great loss to you. My grandfather had made a wheelbarrow as a little kid, a tremendously amazing wheelbarrow. And his older brother was just a mean guy, and he would load that wheelbarrow heavier and heavier until the whole wheelbarrow broke apart. And it meant so much to my grandfather that his mother, when he was 8-year-old, understood that that child had had a tremendous loss when his wheelbarrow was just smashed by his older brother by just loading it down and not having respect for what it meant to his younger brother. That's the kind of thing that he remembered all his life. It stood for something that was a point in time, but it was his mother being willing to recognize that he had a grief that meant something to Grandpa Walbert. At that time, it almost made it all right that even one person knew what he had lost. So some of that is here. Went to the questions. So I think there is something healing about sweet silent thought as people go back over their old woes. I summon up remembrance of things past. Now, I saw the lack of many a thing I thought, well, that sounds like an unfulfilled wish of youth. I wanted to be a professional pianist, and all I ever got to do was play in a few local concerts or something. I never made the mark I was aiming for. Or with old woes, new wail, my dear time's waste. Line 4 almost recognizes that rehearsing old woes is a waste of new time. But waste can mean spend. It can just mean spend, expend, but it can mean spend foolishly or spend with no real purpose. With old woes, new wail, my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye. Now the next section turns that a little bit. Then can I drown an eye, unused to flow, that my eye doesn't usually flow. You know, I haven't cried about this before. For precious friends hid in death's stateless night. Almost as if the woe of losing a friend long ago becomes greater as time goes by. You more and more realize what it meant to lose that friend. And weep afresh loves long since canceled woe. I got over that and turned the page a long time ago, but I still remember and can weep afresh what I really went through at that time. Is this speaker in this poem allowing and taking new healing from the re-rehearsal of an old woe? How many of you have ever had a friend who really burdened you? Maybe you carried the burden, but burdened you with an extended repeating and repeating and repeating of old woes that you know is not healthy, but you struggle with whether it's more helpful to listen again to their old woes or whether it's more helpful to say, yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Let's go shopping, you know, or something. Let's have a picnic or something to turn the page, change their mood for a minute, get them out of what we see as a little bit of a rut. Moan the expense of many a vanished thought. Now, is Shakespeare allowing the idea that some canceled woes should stay canceled? Well, yes, in the couplet. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. And the ending is just magnificently sufficient for covering all of these old woes. So it's the turn to friendship in the last couplet that is the judgment upon what just happened in the last 12 lines. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought. In other words, you could almost say the sonnet says, when to the sessions of silence, of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past and go overboard like the next 10 lines are going to do, which I knew pay as if not paid before. That's almost a judgment in that line. I'm paying again for what I already paid for these. I already moaned these moans. It's finished. I completed that. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. So in the end, the spirit does say, okay, that's enough. I close this now. I am going to concentrate on my friendships and the present time. And you, dear friend, have helped to restore the losses and end the sorrows that I just got done moaning again. So something happens in the sonnet that's not stuck in where line 6 was. It's not stuck where the third quatrain was. The whole sonnet is going to move around to rebalance at the end after this tremendous load goes over on this side, like you have a scale, and all these woes are over on this side and just gets heavier and heavier. And then by the end, the friendship is so amazing that it balances things out again. I like this sonnet very much. When do the sessions of sweet silent thought? I'm summing up remembrance of things past. 106. Did we have 4 sonnets or were there 5?
We had 113.
Okay. Oh,
106 you said was optional, but we do have.
yes. Okay. Let's turn to 113 because it picks up on one sonnet that I think we discussed last week, which was about what the eye sees and what is really there. And in the philosophy and science, even science of the eye of the 1600s, the scientists were beginning to look at the way we see, and when we see something that's not seen correctly, what is it that's happening? Like when you put your hand underwater, your hand looks like it's at a different angle. And water in a glass has a magnifying effect. So it magnifies when you see through that water, but how do you explain that? So even the scientists of the time, we don't need to detail that. We're looking at what the eye sees and what is really there. And in art, of course, perspective was being discovered so that you had a vanishing point in a painting where the lines of it were drawing to give you an idea of dimension, of a third dimension when you really only have 2 dimensions. So the eye changes what it sees. And the idea that some eyes can see and some eyes cannot see is again found in the Bible. He that hath eyes to see, let him see. It's almost as if some people have that nature in their way of looking that allows them to see things that other people can't see. So this is again on an old poetic theme about and love is blind. I mean, that's the single most common love theme there. Since I left you, mine eye is in my mind. And that which governs me to go about doth part his function and is partly blind. Seems seeing, but effectively is out. For it no form delivers to the heart of bird or flower or shape with which it doth latch. Of his quick objects hath the mind no part, nor his own vision holds what it doth catch. For if it see the rudest or gentlest sight, the most sweet favor or deformedest creature, the mountain or the sea, the day or night, the crow or dove, it shapes them to your feature, incapable of more, replete with you. My most true mind thus makes mine untrue. So we see all the same tricks of turning and the paradoxical word repetitions of turning the line, turning around on itself here that we had elsewhere. I think in this sonnet, Shakespeare is using his usual tools of how to develop a thought, but it's not coming through quite as clearly as in some other sonnets. That's my take. Now, I don't know to what extent you've picked favorites or seen one sonnet seems better to you than another. Do you find yourself making judgments as you go through these that one seems to be artistically better as language than another, or they're just all delicious chocolates in a box?
I like this one. I think he's saying, I see you in everything I look at. Doesn't matter what I look at, I'm looking at you. I'm always thinking about you.
That's beautifully said. And in a way, it's playing on the same idea as my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If hairs be wires, well, then her hairs are done and stuff like that. Her breasts are done. Her breasts are done. And joking about, I see my beloved as my beloved. It doesn't matter what some ideal picture of some other poet might be. And since I left you, mine eye is in my mind. Like I don't have a real eye anymore. It's all about you. And so the beautiful simplicity and connection of the first two lines and the last two lines, and then what's in between is just elaborating on that. Since I left you, mine eye is in my mind, and that which governs me to go about. In other words, my physical eye doth part his function, doesn't work anymore and is partially blind. Seems to be seeing, but in truth is out of kilter. It's off base. For it no form delivers to the heart. When I remember you, since I left you, since you're not there right now, and I can't see you right now here, there isn't any form. My inner eye, my eye in my head, doesn't have the real you sitting right before me to keep correcting itself. It no form delivers to the heart of bird, whatever it is that it's seeing, which it doth latch. And I looked at latch the first time I saw this, and I thought, that's like latch a gate, fasten it in, so it's fixed, it's grasped. Of his quick objects hath the mind no part. I mean, the mind can't actually physically seize that object that it looked at, nor his own vision holds what it doth catch. So it catches something in a way, but it doesn't really latch it or hold it or fix it, make it fix it. For if it sees the rudest or gentlest sight, and then these two, there's contrary lines, the most sweet favor or the most deformed creature, the mountain or the sea, the day or the night, the crow or the dove. The crow is a nasty creature and the dove is sweetness and light. It shapes them to your feature. Incapable of more, replete with you. My most true mind, thus makest mine untrue. I would almost give an old-fashioned Old English pronunciation to make us, to get that extra syllable in there, because that's technically only 9 syllables in that line. My most true mind, thus makest mine untrue. So false and true turned around. And I do agree with, I mean, I chose it because I think it's a beautiful playing with these same rhetorical skills of paradox packed into a compressed and enriched form that gives it compression and intensity of an idea that we can all spin out 14 words to express what 5 words just said so well. And just like the people you dealt with that wanted the 14-word version and wanted to forget about what the English language had done in the thing itself. So I do like 113. How do you feel about it?
This one, to me, because of a specific circumstance, this speaks to me not as a lover, but my husband and I had a very dear friend who was a thalidomide baby. And when we thought about Sandy, we didn't think about, unless there was a reason, and I have to stop and think what Sandy looked like physically, because Sandy is not to me the fact that his face looks like it was burned, or the fact that he only has half a hand or half a foot. It just, Sandy is Sandy, and Sandy has a particular personality, and that's what I think about. I don't think about what he looks like unless I stop and think about what it is, or if we were getting to go somewhere, you had to think, could Sandy climb the stairs, or, that sort of thing. I really didn't think about it.
Mhm.
It was just that he had these particularly wonderful, and he has this wonderful personality, and he's funny, and he's just a very special person. And, so you don't really think about what someone might see the first time you saw him. I don't remember the first time I saw him. So I don't really, think about
Uh-huh.
what he looked like.
So it's like you're perceiving the divine reason why God created some people deformed, because what we call deformed, because
Yes.
it is beautiful when you see them in their wholeness.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. So this is a contemplation on what beauty is, in a way, the perception of beauty and the eye and everything. I would say there, of the 154 sonnets, there's probably a reference to seeing or the eye in at least 10 or 15% of them. When you say, as you look through them, you see it constantly used. And the more we begin, as the Enlightenment was doing, but of course, as the Bible does as well, the psychological perception that the mind is working on the images of what you see. And sometimes you'll go back to something you saw in childhood or something you last saw a long time ago, and it looks so different from what you thought you remembered. Isn't that true? And it's just so amazing. It's also the reason why in courts, the more time has passed since someone saw something, the less credible their testimony is, because of the way the mind works to add things and subtract things and not remember it the way that it was. That's also so interesting about diaries. If you read a diary that you wrote 5 or 10 years ago, and the way you wrote it in the diary is not the way you remember it now, and you go, oh my gosh, was I lying to myself there, or am I wrong now? Very interesting.
Going back to Holland years away, and I went to go to look at places that I live. And it's more like looking at a picture than at a place. It's just like
Seeing it as seeing houses that I used to live in when I was from birth till 14 years old.
Yeah.
And then I come back when I'm 63 and I see these places, and looking at it, I see a picture
Yes.
rather
Or-
than, oh, that's where I used to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that,
And yet, well, speaking for myself, going back to places where I lived in childhood, you were so small then that it looked very big to you. Now you come back and this is so tiny. What did I think was so big here?
Yeah.
Okay. Or if you have a sibling close to your age and you get together and realize how many things you remember differently, like dramatically differently, that are just, how could you be so wrong?
yes, we have a family site on where we all put in something about what we, ourselves and that.
Yes.
And then I can remember a tale that was told that my brother that's a year younger than one day when he was little, my mom looks out and she sees this little blonde head bobbing around the house. And I approached them and I said, did that really happen? Or it was this just a story that was told to us about, because it wasn't my experience. It must have been a story in the house. And my brother that it was said, yeah, he said some dog got after him and he came home because he was scared. So he's going around the house because he'd be late for school. He's in kindergarten.
Uh-huh.
Because I just wondered if it was a myth that had been created
Yeah. Yeah.
but it really did happen.
Well, long ago in yesteryear, the husband I was mentioning, his family and I knew each other. Our families knew each other. And the two families had gone to a picnic out at the lake in Holland, here in Holland. He is positive this was at Tunnel Park, and I am positive it was at Ottawa Beach. So we just had this ongoing joking, argument about, I know I'm right, you're wrong. It wasn't Tunnel Park. So the eye can be wrong and the memory can be wrong. So the next one we'll look at is Sonnet 30? No, 106. When in the Chronicle of Wasted Time, I see descriptions of the fairest whites and beauty making beautiful old rhyme in praise of ladies dead and lovely knights. Then in a blazon of sweet beauty's best, of hand, of foot, of lip, of eye, of brow, I see their antique pen would have expressed even such a beauty as you master now. So all their praises are but prophecies of this our time, all you prefiguring. And for they looked but with divining eyes, they had not skill enough your worth to sing. For we, which now behold these present days, have eyes to wonder, but lack tongues to praise. Okay. It's kind of tied into several of the other poems we've looked at. Beings, creatures. And it might be especially women, I guess, but creatures, or I see descriptions of the fairest whites and beauty making beautiful old rhyme. In praise of ladies dead and lovely knights, that kinds of like sounds chivalric or of long ago, those medieval ideas. Then in the blazon of sweet beauty's best. And again, it's the same theme as My Mistress' Eyes, because the old classic Greek and Roman love poems would describe her hair, her eyes, her lips, her cheeks, her tongue, her throat, and go on down from there, sometimes quite explicitly. And it was like a pattern, like a poetic type. And so he's referring to old poems in praise of women. Their antique pen would have expressed even such a beauty as you master now. Like in the olden days, the poetry would have been adequate to how beautiful you are now. So this is suggesting that all their praises are but foretelling, of this our time, all prefiguring you, lovely you, beyond any beauty of the past. And for they looked, or because they looked, but with divining eyes or foretelling eyes, they had not skill enough your worth to sing. For we, which now behold these present days, have eyes to wonder, but lack tongues to praise. So even all the skills of old time poetry would not be worthy enough to capture your beauty now. It's like this excessively beyond belief beauty that he holds her beyond. I lack the words to express the beauty that is now. Other poems in this vein have put it the other way, that today's poetry is better than poetry of old. In some poems, you'll get the idea that today the poets can sing a woman's praise better than poetry of olden times. We now have greater skill and richness in the language, which in fact was true. I mean, in my opinion, from what I know of how the language had developed, how the grammar and the facility and the powers and the store of metaphor that the language had accumulated by this time, it probably becomes richer over time for those who kind of master the old ways and add the new. They had not skill enough. Your worth to sing. So where do you think the turn is in this poem? Is it more like an 8 and 6, or is it more like 3 quatrains and then a surprising couplet?
Line 9, so all their praises are but prophecy.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a turn there. All their praises are but prophecies of this our time, oh, you prefiguring. So it almost hints that poets do stand on the shoulders of other poets. You've heard great writers say this. Every writer is standing on the shoulders of earlier writers who provided the models and the richness and the cultural storehouse on which new poetry can be built. And their idea is that all poems are old in a way, and yet it makes something new. Take what is old and make it new by your contribution, but it's resting on everything that went before. So I think we've pointed out a lot of ways in which the poems are resting upon stuff that came from the Bible, resting upon stuff that came from Greek and Roman culture and language, resting upon stuff that's Anglo-Saxon and definitely Renaissance and up to date. The new science has come to the world. There are telescopes. They know about the planets. They know that the Earth encircles the sun. Our whole new worlds are opening up in terms of technology and warfare and monuments and everything upon which poetry can build something new. And so, but still, even now, eyes to wonder, but lack tongues to praise. It's a lovely last line. Lack tongues to praise. There's been scholarship that has placed the sonnets in a rising time. When I was trying to decide in what direction I wanted to push a dissertation, I left behind an old desire to write in this period in the 17th century, and I decided to write about Frederick Douglass. So I switched from English to American. Luckily, I had the necessary number of seminars to, make this switch and do this without extensive folly of wasting extra time. But Frederick Douglass was pretty much unknown until the 1960s. I mean, it's amazing to what extent Frederick Douglass, who's so big today, I mean, pretty much anyone who's studied anything about the Civil War of the 19th century has met Frederick Douglass, knows how powerful he was and who he was and what his tremendous place is in his effect upon the culture. But when I was in college, in spite of taking quite a few American culture and history courses, even at home, Frederick Douglass was a footnote. He was in a group of names of abolitionists, that's it. Alongside the white abolitionists, Frederick Douglass would be in there. But to bring him forth as what I think now, I believe that he's one of the two greatest writers of the 1800s in America. I just think his stature is still not fully appreciated to the power that he brought to his passionate task, and the understanding that did draw. Douglass drew from the Bible. We just better believe it. And this latest biography of Douglass has pointed out to what extent he had the ability and the knowledge in his growing years to base a great deal on the religious heritage of ideas and language. And that Douglass in no way, well, he was a self-made, self-taught man, but in a very rich way. And he had the exposure and resources to bring to bear this tremendous power. So Douglass was a rising star. And I was thinking also, when I was going to first do my dissertation, it was going to be on John Donne. Well, let me tell you, in the 1970s, the world did not need another dissertation on John Donne, right? And the professors were saying that, Donne is the most overworked thing. One of my professors said, Donne is done. We're done with Donne. She said, well, if you're going to do Donne, you have to do his prose, because his poems are just well-worn paths. Everything that can be said has been said, and a lot of what's been said is not worth anything anyway. So I made that switch, and it certainly has been true that since I did that dissertation in the 90s, Douglass has just continued to keep coming to the surface with more and more richness in the culture. Shakespeare also believed that poetry is always building upon itself and contributing to the other arts and the other forms. And of course, he published a group of sonnets in 1609 that were launching him as a sonneteer before he had any great reputation as a playwright. he was already involved in theater in London by 1609. But Mimi was pointing out, and I've looked for Upstart Crow, but I can't find it on the programs that I have available, but it's a TV series. Upstart Crow is a TV series. Tell a little bit about it.
Oh, yes, okay. I think you have Acorn.
The British television programs like BritBox and Acorn
Okay,
might have
okay,
that.
so those,
But it's a British comedy, and it's about Shakespeare. It includes each episode includes something about a sonnet or a play. It includes other characters from his time, like Robert Greene and so on. And so there's a little history and Shakespeare in each episode, but it's a comedy. It has made at least my husband interested now in going to some Shakespeare plays. Before he said, well, I don't understand that. I don't want to go. But it's educational too, in a very fun way.
Mhm.
Even has the chicken. We talked about the chicken last, all these little things are in there. So if you have any of those, Upstart Crow. Pardon me?
Acorn,
Acorn or BritBox.
Yeah.
BritBox. Okay. Okay. Thank you for suggesting that. I couldn't find it immediately, but
Okay.
I will get to it because it sounds.
It's a fun
intriguing.
thing, yeah.
I'd enjoy it. So in other words, Shakespeare is ever popular.
Yes, yes.
And one of the definitions of a classic that was drilled into us in graduate school, a classic is that which has pleased the greatest number over the longest period of time.
Mhm,
So don't worry, don't take popular in such a narrow framework.
mhm.
Shakespeare, in a way, will never die. I mean,
Right,
it is
right.
that the body of poetry of a culture is death once dead, there's no more dying then. That every culture will have these things that will live forever. They will, as long as men can breathe or eyes can see, or eyes can still master the English language. Of course, that would be important too. So long lives this, and this gives life to the memory of the culture. There's nothing that will remember the culture better than its written record in the form of literature, because the monuments can be blasted, in a single day, like we saw in the New York Times. And the historical accounts, well, Aristotle said that the poet is greater than the historian, because the historian is locked into what did happen. The poet can deal with what might happen. And that's beautiful. And in a way, he was making the argument that the artistic expression is the one that really gets to the poor soul that is the center of everything else. It gets to the soul of it without having be locked into what actually did happen. Even in writing fiction, have you ever been told that your fiction has to be credible? You have to write credible fiction. Well, think of the most unlikely thing that ever happened to you. That's so unlikely that it did happen, but that's not a reason why you can make a good story out of it. If it's too unlikely, then it's not a good story. But things do happen. We know what probability is. Probability has these two tails on it of, it's extremely improbable that you would be walking around on the campus of your university and riding by on a bicycle, you would see a young man that you met in Vienna 3 years earlier on a street, just when you're looking for a laundry, and he shows you where there's a laundry. And then he takes you and your roommate out on a little tour one night, and you go seeing sights around Vienna because he has a car. And so that was a nice evening, and you remember him. Nothing ever came of it. He wasn't somebody you made a friend of, but you saw him enough to remember him, and you see him on a bicycle driving by at the University of Chicago. So the second time you see him, you stop and you say, I think I met you in Vienna. And first he thinks it's a pickup line, like, haven't I seen you somewhere before, But then we figured out that he had been a student at the Vienna Hochschule, a very high-class Viennese technical high school, which could indeed lead to someone coming out to, it's not as unlikely as you think, but it was extremely unlikely. Well, that's an example of the extremely unlikely. Don't put it in a story because your reader won't believe it. So the poet can deal with what might have been and can make things seem likely even when they're not, because it's the real toad in the imaginary garden. If you give enough detail to the toad you're describing, people will accept the idea that the whole garden is imaginary. You create the imaginary garden at the beginning and you make the toads seem so real that they suspend their disbelief. They will come into your fiction and look at what you're doing and see it as reasonable and logical because it's what might have been, and you can see how it might have been. So all these theories of art are pointing back to the power of art to overcome death and time, and in a very real way, do that in a culture that neither monuments nor other historical records can actually do in the same way. And so the way that the sonnets can often condense and intensify these things with so many powers of the language, the fact that the language has so many different tenses and has the subjunctive mood, if only I were, da 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 da. Not every language has that. Not every language has by the time you get there, I will have been there for 10 minutes. That's like a future past tense. Not every language even has a future tense, let alone a tense like I will have been there for 10 minutes by the time you get there. We have the ability in our grammar to get to those dealing with time. Tense is about time. So no wonder the theme is time, because we have a grammar that's able to handle an expression of time in ways that some languages cannot do. That doesn't mean that person in that culture doesn't think the same way as any other human, but we have the vehicle by which it can be translated, let's say, and then the influx of all these other languages that contributed their various strengths to the peculiar human sense of saying, hey, that French word, I like it, let's bring it into English, or that Dutch word or that Latin word, is going to fit right here and it'll have the right tone, it'll sound right. And the poetry can pull on all of these things. If you look at how many of these sonnets use extremely short, simple words that are in a way concrete, we have the imagery load that makes every sonnet both particular in a way that's charming and general enough to touch something human that all people share. It's general in a way, and yet it's particular in the way that it needs to be particular to have its own particular cast and style and favor to it. So that's the greatness of the art. Certainly the skills of the sonnet fed into the plays in so many ways, and those of us who've seen some of the plays just see all the ways that drama comes through, even to a 4-year-old, or to a husband who got acculturated to Shakespeare in a way in the old days that was off-putting. So now he really needs to see a good play put on and see how accessible it really is when good actors do the Shakespeare plays today. They can really bring it across, I think, in almost even the history plays, let alone the romances and the comedies and the Tempest and everything. Okay, thank you very much. Feel free to send me emails if you find out interesting things about Shakespeare or things we talked about. I'd love to hear from you. And I thought it was a very fun class to teach and carry out.
Thank you so much, Linda. We appreciate you.